Hello everybody, thank you for coming to my TED Talk. The question that I have been wanting to answer is, are electric vehicles a viable solution to the internal combustion powered vehicles? Now, we've all heard that our average car creates a ton of pollution, and we've seen the introduction of electric vehicles on the market today, but what's really happening in the background that has created a need to drop and replace a very proven technology that we've been using for more than 100 years? Well, mostly it comes down to pollution. The average vehicle uses a fuel known as E10. That is a mixture of 10% ethanol and 90% gasoline. Burning a gallon of ethanol creates 12.7 pounds of CO2, while burning a gallon of gasoline will produce 19.7 pounds of CO2. Burning a gallon of E10 will create about 18.9 pounds of CO2. When it comes to diesel, that is usually B20, a mixture of 20% biodiesel and 80% petroleum diesel. That, when burned, creates about 17.9 pounds of CO2. Now, on the assumption that the average car gets about 21.4 miles to the gallon and will drive about 11,400 miles in a year, that means that the average car creates 4.7 metric tons of CO2 in 1 year. When you add all of the cars up in the US, that means that our cars are creating 30% of the total pollution in the 30% of the total energy-related pollution in the US. Now, it's not just pollution that's creating a need to go away from these engines. In fact, part of it is just how complicated they are. The average engine works on a 4-stroke cycle. The first stroke, brings in air and fuel. Second stroke compresses the air and fuel, and once the engine's at top dead center, the spark plug ignites the fuel. The fuel explodes, forcing the piston down in the third stroke, known as the power cycle, and as the piston tries to come back up, the exhaust valve is opened and it pushes the exhaust out. In diesel, everything is exactly the same, except for the fact that it uses compression instead of a spark plug. The compression ignites the fuel. Diesel engines have to use a higher compression ratio, with the average internal combustion engine using 8:1 to maybe 10:1 as the compression ratio. Diesel engines will go as far as 14:1 to maybe 20:1 to create enough compression. This high compression ratio is also more thermal efficient, meaning that you can use less fuel and use a leaner burn, meaning that diesels can actually become more clean. But electric cars avoid all of this complexity. Electric cars are small little motors that don't have tiny little parts that need time to spin up and reach high RPMs to reach power. In fact, to reach full power of an internal combustion engine, you need to push the engine upwards of 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 RPM, while the electric motor creates all of its torque instantly. The torque in a vehicle is forced to rotate around an axle, which is then translated to forward movement through the drivetrain. And an electric vehicle doesn't have to wait to use all of its power. An internal combustion engine, once it reaches power, is in the range of breaking everything. Now, one of the problems for electric vehicles is the infrastructure. Recently, Denver spent $100,000 on 160 charging stations, emergency charging stations, for the growth of electric vehicles. They went from 1,600 electric vehicles reported in the city 4 years ago to 10,000 today. Now, while 100,000 doesn't seem like a lot for 160 stations, when you put it to the whole world, we're looking at $12.7 trillion worth of work needed to be done to support the switch to electric, which each company has their own vision of when they want to switch to electric. GM wants to go by 2025. Other companies like Mazda and Porsche just don't want to drop their internal combustion engines. but there's Tesla that's pushing out with all electric as well. Now, also with electric cars, there's a problem of their batteries. The cost right now is about $400 to $500 per kilowatt hour. That's per kilowatt hour capacity of the battery. We want to be reaching at about 125. For the batteries, with the batteries at a cost about $400 to $500 per kilowatt hour, we're looking at about $10,000 per battery. And these batteries don't last more than 3 to 4 years. And with these batteries going out of commission so quickly, we also run across the problem of battery recycling. We've recently found a way to recycle the lithium cobalt dioxide that's used in the anodes and cathodes of the batteries. But while it does drop costs of batteries, that doesn't keep them from being short-lived. Now, one great thing about these electric vehicles, which we've all heard and we all know, is that they create zero tailpipe emissions. I am unfairly ignoring the emissions created from the production of the electricity by burning coal, but the average electric car will zero out its emissions after 4.69 years of being used. At that point, the cost of creation of the vehicle reaches the same amount of CO2 emissions that running an average internal combustion vehicle makes. Now, flipping back to the batteries, the lithium cobalt dioxide has one major flaw. When it reaches about 105 to 135 degrees Celsius, the material experiences thermal runaway. At this point, the batteries they run away thermally, and they just heat up too much and they break down and they break completely and need to be replaced. We've been trying to find a new material to use, and we've been playing around with some experimental materials that has dropped the cost from $400 to $500 per kilowatt hour capacity down to $325 per kilowatt hour. And we've also made a few developments recently that have found out we can push our charging capacity to be 8 times faster without overheating the batteries. Now, while these... Excuse me while I stumble over my words again. When it comes to these electric cars, they may all seem well and good, but they won't be a truly viable solution until we can meet our infrastructure properly and we can find a solution to the thermal runaway batteries. Okay. Guess that's it from me.
All right, thank you.